Hey guys. Tonight, we begin with a lie you've been sold your whole life. That what happens to your body after death doesn't matter. That cremation is clean, modern, harmless. But what if it's not? What if choosing fire over burial isn't just a preference, but a mistake with eternal consequences? Because here's the truth. For most of human history, the body was sacred. It was buried, wrapped, honored. Now, we burn it, grind the bones, and call it closure. But ancient scripture, early Christians, and the very dirt beneath your feet, they tell a different story. One where the body isn't disposable. One where ashes don't rise. And one where fire doesn't just end life, it erases it. You've been told, it's just a body. But what if it's more? What if the soul isn't the only thing that gets remembered or forgotten? This is why you might not be safe if you're cremated. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up in a world with no graves. The sky is pale like smoke trapped in glass sand. The ground beneath your feet is soft, shifting, unsteady. You take a step forward. It crunches like fine gravel, but when you kneel and run your fingers through it, it's not rock, it's ash, endless, weightless, as if all the dust of time had gathered here in silence. There are no headstones, no names carved in stone, no crosses weathered by rain, just this open land, horizonless, and gray. You walk, not because you know where you're going, but because stillness feels worse. There's no wind, no birds, not even the buzz of insects. Only your breath and the sound of your footsteps disappearing behind you. The air is thick, dry, and it smells faintly of smoke. Not fresh, but old, like something burned long ago and forgot to stop. Eventually, you come to what you think is a tree, but as you get closer, you see it's just the remains of only a husk, hollowed out, blackened to its core. Around it, the ground dips ever so slightly, forming a shallow basin. You recognize the shape, not because it looks familiar, but because something inside you stirs with the knowledge of what should be there. A grave, or at least where one ought to have been. But there's nothing, no marker, no name, no reminder that someone once stood here, lived here, died here. The world has forgotten, and that forgetting feels like a second death. You keep walking. You begin to notice patterns in the ash, scorched outlines, scattered indentations, as if something once lay here, rows and rows of them. At first they seem random, but soon you realize they are aligned, spaced evenly, as if something had been buried in order, one beside the other. But now, nothing remains. No bones, no coffins, no stone to break the endless flatness. Just this gray breath of a world, constantly dissolving itself with every step you take. You stop, because somewhere in your chest, you feel it, that ache you only get when memory brushes against something sacred. A face, a voice, a prayer you once heard whispered beneath the soil. But here, there's no soil, only ash. Nothing to hold memory, no place to return to. The past has been erased, not with violence, but with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just take lives, it takes stories. You speak, just to hear a voice. Yours sounds strange in this place, small, soft, like it doesn't belong. And then it hits you. This isn't just the absence of graves. It's the absence of witness. There are no names here because no one stayed behind to write them. No gravestones because no hands carved them. No funerals because no one gathered. All that remains is the question: if no one remembers where you were laid, did you ever truly rest? You feel the weight of the world's forgetting pressing in, not heavy like stone, but light like dust in your lungs. And in that weightlessness, something inside you begins to resist. You want to remember, not just for yourself, but for all the nameless who once were. Because to walk in a world with no graves is to walk among lives that were never honored. And every step you take kicks up more of what's left fine gray ash, rising like a ghost with no name. You close your eyes and whisper one, any name, just to prove it's still possible. You breathe in what feels like someone else's bones. The air doesn't just smell of a shit clings to your tongue, coats your throat, settles deep inside your lungs like a history you didn't ask for. You cough, softly at first, but it builds. Not because the air is thick, but because it is full. Full of things long lost, full of endings. The sky above doesn't move. It isn't cloudy, just permanently paused, like someone forgot to restart the world. There's no sun, just a dull glow bleeding evenly through the atmosphere, erasing all shadow. The horizon is a smear of grays, every shade of absence laid over the next. It feels like the kind of place where time doesn't pass, it just sifts. You try not to think about it, but every breath is a reminder. This isn't dust from the earth, this is dust from the dead. Someone's father, someone's daughter. Someone whose name was spoken once in a room of candles and prayers and trembling hope. Now, their name is gone, and their body lingers in particles, in air, in you. A strange guilt forms in your gut. Not sharp, not even heavy, just steady. The knowledge that this place doesn't let the dead lie still. It keeps them moving, breaking them down to the smallest parts, then pressing them into the lungs of the living. You breathe them, carry them, become them. A voice once told you that memory lives in the bones, that the marrow holds stories deeper than blood. If that's true, then what happens when the bones become smoke? When the fire doesn't just destroy but disperses? Do the stories go with Themor? Are they trapped in the air, waiting for someone to notice? You look around. There are no photographs, no journals, no etched names on plaques. The past is invisible here, but not gone. You feel it in your teeth. Smell it when you press your nose to your own wrist. A dry, bitter scent, like burnt paper soaked in salt. You remember a funeral once, not your own, but someone else's. A small casket, pale wood, polished like it mattered. There had been a field, green grass, real dirt, people in black. A shovel passed from hand to hand, tears mixed with soil. You didn't understand it then, not fully. But now, you envy that moment, that burial, that dignity. Because here, there is no grave, no coffin, no ritual. Just the drift of forgotten flesh carried endlessly through a sky that refuses to change. You wonder if this place was always like this, or if it became this way when the fires began. You try to speak, but your mouth is too dry. The words feel too heavy to lift off your tongue. Or maybe you're just afraid they'll land wrong, that they'll sink straight into the ground and be lost, like everything else. You sit, not because you're tired, but because standing feels too hopeful. The ash accepts your weight. It doesn't push back, doesn't hold you. It just lets you sink slightly, like you were meant to disappear here too. You wipe your palms against your knees, but the dust stays. It settles into the lines of your skin like it belongs there. Somewhere in the distance you think you hear something. A voice, a footstep, but the air swallows sound the same way it swallows names. You strain your ears, but there's nothing. Only the quiet crackle of memory dissolving in the breeze. If this place has a god, it is made of silence. You close your eyes. The air moves through you again. And this time, you let it. You don't remember falling asleep, but you must have, because when you open your eyes again, everything is darker. The ash has settled thicker now, like snow that forgot how to melt. It clings to the ridges of your arms, your legs, your throat. Even when you shake it off, it returns soft, weightless, determined. It coats you like a ritual you never agreed to. You rise slowly, joints aching as though you've aged 100 years in a night. But there is no night here. Not really, just a thinning of the light. A bruising at the edge of the horizon that never becomes shadow. You wipe your hands against your chest, but it only smears the gray. And then you hear it. The voice. It doesn't come from behind you or in front. It arrives like breath in your earlobe, quiet, final. There are no bodies here, only endings. You turn, but there is no one. Just the hollow echo of the words pulsing through the air. You want to call back, ask who they were, what they meant, but your mouth is dry again. The voice leaves you with a stillness worse than silence. Because now you know someone else knows, and they're not coming back. You look at your hands. The lines that once marked your palms are faded, obscured by soot. Your skin no longer feels like yours. It doesn't feel like skin at all. It feels like the remains of something used up, as if you are what's left after the fire, not before it. You kneel instinctively and run your fingers through the earth, searching for something solid beneath the surface. But it's all the same inch after inch of ash, packed thick, layered deep. You dig until your nails are blackened and your arms tremble, but you find no bone, no stone, no coffin, nothing buried. Only layers of what once was, collapsed into dust. They burned it all. You can feel it now, the story of this place. It wasn't always like this. There were once trees here, people, words spoken aloud and folded into soil, but something changed. Someone decided fire was faster, cleaner, more modern, and so they stopped burying, they stopped marking, they stopped waiting. They burned the bodies, and then they burned the books, and then the names. Not all at once, but piece by piece, until the fire was no longer a tool, but a theology, until the smoke became the prayer, until the idea of placing the dead into the ground became strange, wasteful even. You walk, not far, just enough to reach a slope where the land dips inward like a crater. You don't know if it was a pit or a furnace, but the smell is still here, not fresh, just lingering, like something scorched into the bones of the earth. You wonder how many went this way, how many bodies were offered up to the flame without ceremony. No linen, no songs, no touch, just ignition. A process, they called it. Efficient. Environmentally sound. You imagine metal trays, gloves, gas jets, and silence. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The dead were supposed to be remembered, held, placed gently into the arms of the earth, like seeds waiting to wake. But there are no seeds here, no sleepers, only endings. And suddenly, it's not the absence of bodies that frightens you. It's the absence of grief. Because grief leaves markstones, flowers, names. But here, even mourning has been erased. There's nothing left to honor, only air that tastes like memory, only ash that refuses to settle. You sit in the crater until the cold finds your spine. And for the first time since arriving, you wonder what they did with yours. You try to lie down, but the dust shifts beneath you. It moves like water that has forgotten how to floundry, weightless, unwilling to bear the shape of your body. Your back meets the ground, but it doesn't cradle you. It doesn't push back. It yields completely, like it's trying to erase the very idea of your presence. The earth underneath feels hollow, unanchored. You wait for the settling, that gentle weight of gravity tucking you into place, but it never comes. You shift, adjust, press your shoulder deeper into the ground, then your hips, your legs. Nothing changes. The dust gives and gives as if it's never known solidity, like it was never meant to carry the dead or the living. It spills around you in slow motion, always moving, never remembering the shape you left behind. And that absence, that inability to leave an imprint, feels like its own kind of judgment. You sit up, then stand again, brushing the ash from your arms, though it clings in the seams of your clothes, in the cracks of your skin. It follows you, not because it loves you, but because it doesn't care what you are. The ground doesn't resist. It doesn't hold. It just lets you pass through like smoke. You try again. You lie flat, slowly this time, with purpose, as if intention will make it different. You lower your head last, feeling the slight crunch of ash beneath your scalp, like a sound too soft to be heard but too close to ignore. You close your eyes and imagine this is a grave, that you have been placed here, chosen to rest here, that someone gathered your body with care, folded your arms, kissed your forehead, and wept. But the earth doesn't know how to carry that story. Your body begins to sink, not quickly, not dramatically, just subtly. An inch, maybe two. Enough that your spine begins to curve, that your ribs feel unsupported, that your limbs feel detached from their own weight. You are not cradled. You are not held. You are not remembered by the earth. You wonder if this is what it means to be forgotten, not by people, but by the very planet, as if the world itself has moved on from bodies, as if flesh no longer deserves a place to rest. You imagine a time when burial meant belonging, when the ground would receive you like a womb, when dirt was more than dust, when it knew the difference between a grave and a ditch. But now it doesn't seem to care whether you're alive or dead. You sit up once more, and this time you don't brush yourself off. What's the point? There's no clean here, no separation between you and the dust. It covers you the way it covers everything, without interest, without grief, without reverence. You think of the phrase, rest in peace. How often it's whispered at bedsides and funerals, etched into stone, sewn into prayers. But rest requires ground that welcomes. Peace requires place. And here, in this ashen sprawl, there is no such invitation. You walk again, slowly now. Each step sinks just enough to remind you that you don't belong, that you were not buried here, that maybe you weren't buried at all. The ground refuses to remember you, and you are beginning to understand why that matters. You find it near the edge of a broken ridge, half buried beneath the ash like a memory someone tried to forget but couldn't quite erase. At first, it looks like another skeleton of stone-crumbling pillars, shattered steps, a few scattered blocks choked with dust. But as you get closer, something about the shape begins to speak. Not loudly, not in words, but with presence. There is no roof, no doors, nothing to keep the wind out, though the wind has long since stopped trying. What remains is only suggestion, a few columns arranged in a forgotten pattern, their tops jagged like broken teeth, a threshold with no gate, walls with no height. It's all open now, vulnerable to sky and silence alike. You step through what once might have been an entrance. There's no resistance, no shift in the air to tell you you've crossed into anything sacred. And yet, your feet move slower here. Your breath softens. Instinctively, you lower your voice, though you haven't spoken in hours. This place demands quiet, even in ruin. There is no altar, only a flat stone, blackened at its center, as if fire had tried to rewrite what blood once made holy. You kneel beside it, not in reverence exactly, but because standing feels like a violation. You brush the surface with your sleeve. The soot clings. The cold creeps in from beneath. You imagine what it used to be. Voices rising in song. Oil lamps casting flickers of gold along curved stone. Cloth worn thin from kneeling. You try to picture it full of prayers, of breath, of waiting hearts. But the vision won't come. The silence here is too complete, like even memory has given up. You stand and walk the length of the ruin, tracing the line of where a wall once stood. Your fingers hover just above the edge, touching nothing. It feels like walking through a ghost reel, enough to unsettle, but never enough to hold. You wonder if anyone mourned when it fell, or if it happened slowly, one forgotten stone at a time. The ground is uneven, as if graves once lined the perimeter. But there are no names, no markers, just indentations in the ash where bodies might have rested, long since carried off by wind or neglect. You kneel again, this time not to pray, but to listen, not with your ears, but with your bones. There is something here. Not a voice, not a vision, just weight, residue, the echo of something once sacred that refuses to leave, even after everything else has. You feel it settle on your shoulders, like hands. Not comforting, but known, as if it remembers you, even if you do not remember it. You lie back on the stone floor and stare up at the empty sky framed by fractured columns. The openness above you feels endless. The ruin offers no shelter, no covering. And still, something inside you loosens. Not peace, not quite, but the ache of returning to a place that once held meaning, even if the meaning is lost. You close your eyes. The dust breathes around you, and though there is no roof, no altar, no choir, you realize this ruin has outlived everything else, not because it was strong, but because it was needed. Because, even in its collapse, it gave shape to longing. A temple without walls, a hollow that still knows how to hold. You don't find the pyre, it finds you. At first it looks like a circle of blackened stone, half sunken in the ash, a forgotten camp, or maybe a ruin from another collapse. But as you draw near, the air changes. It doesn't move, it hasn't moved in days, but it thickens, heavier, somehow, like walking through breath that isn't yours. The stones are scorched deep, burned through to the center. Whatever fire lived here was not meant for cooking or comfort. This wasn't a hearth, it was a sentence. The ground inside the circle is bare. Not clear, nothing here is ever clean but disturbed, as though something once thrashed or was gathered. You kneel and run your fingers across the stone, and it comes away oily, the soot still clinging like it remembers what happened. You press your palm flat against the center, and though it's cold now, there's a shape burned into it. A depression where something once lay, something once offered. You look for remains, bone, metal, ash that holds form, but there is nothing. Whatever was here is gone, consumed, taken by flame or by time. The fire has finished its work. Only the grief remains, rising like smoke that never leaves. You sit beside the pyre and stare into the center, waiting for some image to appear, some trace of what was lost. But nothing comes. Only that strange sense of absence, louder than presence. You begin to realize this fire was not lit in love. It was not ritual. It was erasure. Something someone didn't want to bury. Something someone couldn't bear to return to the earth. Maybe it was faster this way. Maybe it was cleaner. But what it wasn't, what it could never be, was sacred. You try to picture it. The lighting of the flame. The silence that followed. Did anyone watch? Did anyone weep? Or was it just procedure switches flipped, levers pulled, doors sealed shut, and marked complete? You think of warmth and how it carries touch, how it holds a room together, how it softens. This fire did none of that. This fire devoured. You lie on your side, facing the circle, the dust clinging to your cheek like ash from a cigarette, and you wonder how many others were given to this flame. How many names were fed to it without ceremony, how many faces dissolved before they were remembered. You feel a heat begin to rise not from the stones, but from within. A tightness in your chest, not rage exactly, but sorrow that has sharpened. The kind of sorrow that doesn't ask to be healed. You whisper a name, any name, a name that has no one to answer to it anymore. It vanishes into the stillness. You press your hand against the stones one last time, trying to imagine they could hold anything. But they don't. They are only the echo of heat, only the husk of a fire that wasn't for warmth. You rise, and for a moment, you feel like you're leaving someone behind. Not because they're buried there, but because they weren't, because they should have been. And the earth still remembers the difference. You don't know how far you've walked, only that your legs ache in a way that feels older than fatigue. The landscape hasn't changed. Still, the same endless veil of gray, the same dry hush draped over everything like mourning that never lifted. But something begins to shift in the silence, something beneath it. Not a sound exactly, but a knowing, a pull. You follow it, not because you trust it, but because there's nothing else to follow. Eventually, the ash thins, just a little, enough for stone to appear beneath it, flat, wide, deliberate. It's not a road. It's older than roads, more sacred. You kneel and brush the powder aside with your sleeve, revealing a carved line, faint, worn, barely surviving, but still there, a mark someone meant to last. You trace it with your finger and hear the whisper. Not from around you, but from within. A name you don't remember learning, folded inside a sentence you didn't expect to carry. Then from dust you came, and to dust you shall return. You look up. There's a dip in the ground ahead. Not deep, just a shallow fold in the earth. It isn't a grave in the way you've come to expect, no headstone, no cross, no flowers. But it's different from everything else you've seen. The ash here has settled quietly, as if in respect. The air tastes less bitter, like something was honored here, or is still being remembered. You kneel again, this time with intent. And beneath the ash you find it, a stone slab, plain, unadorned, but placed, not dropped or left, behind placed. You brush the surface slowly, the way you might touch the cheek of someone sleeping. The stone is cool, still. It doesn't recoil. It doesn't shift. It holds. This is where it happened. The first body buried. You don't know whose it was. You don't know if they had a name, or if that name was spoken aloud. But you know somehow they weren't discarded. They weren't burned. They weren't rushed into forgetting. They were given to the ground the way one gives a seed, carefully, with expectation. You sit beside the grave, your legs crossed, your hands in your lap like a child waiting to be taught. You think about that first burial, about the way God must have watched the body being lowered into the soil, not with despair, but with solemnity, not as punishment, but as promise, that from this earth something would rise again, not just dust returning to dust, but life folded back into life. You lie down beside the grave and close your eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. The stillness here is different. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't forget. It holds space, as if the ground here still knows how to carry weight. Not just the weight of a body, but the weight of meaning. You don't speak. You don't need to. The presence is enough. And in that moment, you understand something you didn't before. It wasn't the burial that made this holy. It was the care, the giving over, the refusal to turn a body into garbage. The belief that what was placed into the earth was not finished, but waiting. You open your eyes. The grave is still there, but so is the promise. You hear the voices before you see anyone. They don't come from the horizon or the wind. They rise like smoke from the dust, stitched into the silence, repeating themselves without urgency, without doubt. It's cleaner, they say. Quicker, easier on the family. Who cares? You pause mid-step. Not because the voices are loud, but because they sound so familiar, polished, rehearsed, like something said at a conference table, over coffee, in sterile rooms with muted lighting and laminated pamphlets. It's just the body, one says, flat and factual. They're not in there anymore. Laughter follows, light, efficient, almost kind. You keep walking, but their words follow, slipping beneath your ribs, nesting just behind your heart. Another voice, this one older, steadier, says, dust to dust. And then, with finality, the soul doesn't care what we do with what's left. A door shuts in your mind, as if that settled it. And yet, something inside you aches. Not with logic, not with argument, but with memory. A grief-shaped silence swelling beneath the surface, like a bruise you don't remember earning. You stop again and kneel in the ash, running your fingers through it slowly. It's so fine, so weightless, like it could slip through the world and never be caught. Is this all a body becomes? You remember your grandmother's hands, the way they folded laundry, the way they smoothed your forehead when you were too sick to sleep, the way they shook when she prayed, knuckles pressed white against each other. You remember how her body was lowered into the earth, the scent of flowers, the creak of wood, the weight of finality wrapped in care. Someone had asked once, softly, if the family had considered cremation. The question floated like a suggestion, not an offense. It's more practical these days, they'd said. Less expensive. But your mother had whispered no without looking up, as if the thought itself bruised something sacred. You didn't understand it then. You almost do now. The voices return. It doesn't matter, one says, louder this time. It's all just flesh. But something in you clenches, because you know flesh remembers. It holds things the mind forgets: births and bruises, kisses and scars. It carries the fingerprints of everyone who ever touched it, with love or cruelty or hope. It's not just material, it's memory wrapped in skin. And memory deserves more than a flame that doesn't care who it's devouring. You stand, and suddenly, you realize what the ache inside you is. It's not resistance, it's mourning. Not just for the dead, but for the dying dignity of death itself, for the slow erosion of reverence traded for convenience, for how we've convinced ourselves that the quickest way to be done with a body is the kindest, when deep down we know things that matter take time. You walk again, slower now, the dust curling around your boots. The ache doesn't leave, but neither does the quiet. And for the first time, you let yourself wonder, what if it does matter? What if we were never meant to be discarded? What if the earth still waits for what fire took too soon? You almost miss it. Half buried beneath a brittle tangle of roots, the jar leans slightly to one side, as if it had been placed in haste or dropped without care. The glass is smudged with ash, its metal lid tarnished and loose. At first, it could be anything: an old oil lamp, a broken canister, some remnant of the world that came before this one. But then you see the label, faded, handwritten, crooked, on the surface. Your name. You don't move at first, your breath slows. The world seems to tilt, not violently, just subtly, like something inside you has shifted without permission. You reach out, and your fingers hesitate just above the rim. The glass feels cold, even through the layers of dust. You lift it. It's light, lighter than it should be, lighter than memory, lighter than grief. You shake it gently. The contents shift like powder, soft, dry, final. You unscrew the lid and look inside. Ash, gray, fine, unremarkable. You hold it in both hands now, staring into it, waiting for something more to appear: a bone fragment, a lock of hair, a hint of who you were. But there's nothing, just dust, just the end of everything you once thought mattered. It doesn't feel like you. It doesn't even feel like a person. It feels like what's left when the process is over, when the form has vanished and all that remains is a suggestion. You run your thumb along the rim and suddenly remember your first scraped knee, the sting of it, the salt of tears. the warmth of a hand lifting you back onto your feet. That pain, so small now, so long ago, where is it in this jar? Where is the laughter? The songs you hummed while you worked? The ache in your legs after running barefoot through wet grass? Where are the bruises, the secrets, the dreams you never told anyone? Where is the weight of your own becoming? You lift the jar to your chest, and it doesn't press against you, it floats. Like the soul left, and the body went with it. But this was never the body. This is what was left after it was erased. You imagine someone handing this to your family. A stranger in a quiet room, a folded flag of politeness. Here, they'd say, this is them now. But it isn't. It can't be. You kneel in the ash, setting the jar down between your knees. You want to pour it out, to see if the story is hiding in the grains. But something holds you back. Not reverence, not fear. Just the weight of a question you don't know how to ask. If this is you, where were you meant to go? Not into glass, not onto a shelf, not scattered into wind that forgets. You pick it up again and hold it close. The name on the label trembles in your vision, not from the air, but from your hands. It's too light to hold your story, but too heavy to carry away. You walk for hours, maybe longer. The ground doesn't change, just more of the same pale hush, the same endless dust folding into itself like forgotten linen. But something gnaws at the edge of your thoughts. Not a sound, but the absence of one. A silence that feels too exact, too deep to be accidental. You don't know what you expected. Songs, maybe. Echoes. A hymn clinging to the wind. But there is nothing. And the nothing grows louder. You pass through what was once a corridor, its arches half swallowed by ash. Beneath your feet, the stones are cracked in precise angles, as if scorched from the inside out. There are no carvings, no inscriptions, just the bare hint of design that's long since worn away. You stop and look up, hoping for a fresco, a cross, a trace of witness. But the ceiling is gone. All that's left is sky, gray and unmoved, pressing down with the weight of a forgotten promise. You call out, not loudly, but enough to feel your own voice in the air. It thins immediately. No echo, no reply, just your breath evaporating into silence. Where are they? The ones who should have remained. The martyrs, the saints, the names we used to whisper when fear grew teeth. You think of fire again. Not the one in the hearth, but the one on the stake. You think of bones that stood against empire, of flesh that didn't fold when the sword came close. You think of those who bled so others could believe, and you wonder where they are now. You kneel in a patch of ground, where the ash is darker, finer. You press your palms into it, almost hoping to feel a shape underneath a grave, a tomb, a marker of resistance. But there is only dust, soft and obedient, the kind that yields too easily. You close your eyes, and the silence presses closer. You try to remember their names. Stephen, Perpetua, Polycarp. Names once spoken with reverence, once etched into stone and skin. Names that once meant something more than death. You whisper them, one by one, like a litany offered to emptiness. But the earth doesn't stir. You stand and walk again, searching now. Not for direction, but for testimony. Something to tell you they were here, that their lives were not consumed without witness. That holiness didn't vanish in the same fire that devoured memory. But this place has no shrines, no bones in boxes, no stones that sing. Just space. A wide, aching space where there should have been memory. You stop again. This time not from fatigue, but from sorrow. Because something is deeply wrong. Not just the dust, not just the silence, but the forgetting. The holy ones are missing. The saints who once refused to kneel, who clung to faith while their flesh was taken, are now nowhere. Their absence feels heavier than death. as if what was sacred has been scraped clean, as if the world has been rewritten with convenience, and they didn't fit in the margins. You sit in the center of the nothing and bow your head. You don't pray. You just wait. And in that waiting, you begin to understand. They weren't erased by time. They were stolen by fire. And silence is what was left behind. It comes to you slowly, like a memory you didn't know was yours. Not through vision, but through scent. A sharpness in the air char, old and sour, clinging to the dust. You pause and taste it at the back of your throat. It doesn't burn, but it doesn't leave either. It hovers like smoke without a source. That's when the stories come back. Not the soft ones. Not the psalms or the shepherds. But the ones with fire. You see the gates of Sodom in your mind, still smoldering beneath a sky turned sulfur. You see the cities collapse not in a storm of swords or flood, but in flame, divine, final. A judgment that needed no second word. You feel the weight of Lot's wife turning her head. One last look, and the silence that followed. Then another name surfaces. Nadab and Abihu. You don't remember the details, just the arc. Two sons offering something strange, something unasked for. And fire comes down not gently, not slowly, but with purpose. It doesn't leave them wounded. It leaves them gone. You remember that too, how clean the judgment was. No screaming, no trial, just absence, crisp and unarguable. You keep walking, and every shadow looks like a scorched altar. Every breeze feels like breath that passed too close to holy. You begin to wonder when we forgot what fire used to mean. Not comfort, not closure, but curse. You reach a rise in the earth and see a pit below round, deep and lined with stone. No flame now, just ash like every other place, but the shape of it still holds weight. A place where something was burned. Maybe someone, maybe many. You don't need to know the names. You already feel it. This wasn't a hearth. It was punishment. You kneel at the edge and peer in. The bottom is dry, empty, no bones, no smoke. But still, something clenches in your chest. You remember how the prophets used to speak of fire, not as metaphor, as consequence. You remember how Elijah called it down to consume soaked offerings and silence liars. You remember the mountain trembling, the voice from the bush, the flames that told Moses, "Come closer, but no further." And now we burn our dead and call it mercy. We speak of flame as release, as peace, as modern grace. But you've seen fire. You've seen what it leaves behind. And something in you knows it doesn't bless. It devours. You sit at the pit's edge and press your hand against the stone, blackened and cracked with heat long gone. The surface is brittle, like truth that's been stepped on too many times. You imagine someone standing here, holding a body, not lifting it with care, but handing it over, offering it to a flame not as sacrifice but as solution. And you feel the sky recoil, because this was not how it began. Fire was not meant for the body. It was meant for judgment. You lower your head and close your eyes, not in fear, but in reverence for the ones who knew the difference, for the ones who remembered what it meant to return to the earth, not the fire, not the smoke, but the soil that could cradle and call back. You open your eyes. The pit hasn't moved, but your understanding has, and it burns. You don't see them at first. They don't approach with sound or weight, don't disturb the ash, or announce themselves with breath. One moment you are alone in the gray, and the next there is someone beside you, standing a few feet off, still, watching. Their presence doesn't startle you. It calms you in a way that unsettles. There's no threat in their posture, no demand, only a quiet waiting, as if they've been here for a long time and always knew you'd pass through. You study their face and realize it doesn't change. Not youthful, not aged, just steady. Their eyes carry a softness that isn't fragile. Their skin glows faintly, not with light, but with peace. Not the kind that smiles and comforts, but the kind that doesn't need to speak. Still, they do. "Where did they place your body?" they ask, voice low, like a thought spoken aloud. You blink. Your mouth opens, then closes. You look down at your hands, your arms. You feel present, but the question strikes something deeper than flesh. You try to answer, but the truth gets stuck in your throat. "I don't know," you say finally. I didn't have a grave." Their expression doesn't change, but their silence shifts. Not judgment. Something like mourning. They nod once, slowly, as if confirming something already suspected. "I was buried," they say. "It took days to dig the ground by hand. My brothers wrapped me in linen. My mother sang over me." You imagine its soil turned by fingers, prayers whispered into cracked air, the hush of reverence wrapped around a simple act of return. You don't ask what killed them. It doesn't seem to matter here. Death isn't the focus. What came after is, "They knew the earth could hold me," they continue, "that it was made for it, that the soil still listens to God." You lower your gaze. The dust swirls faintly around your ankles. You think about the jar, about the flame, about how no one wrapped you, how no one placed you anywhere, how your body, if it even still exists, was consumed, reclassified as ash, and swept into a container that could be mailed. The stranger kneels and brushes a patch of ground clear, revealing a place where grass once grew. Faint roots remain, dry and pale. They press their palm flat against the earth, and you see it respond not with movement, but with memory. "Here," they say softly, "things rest. Here, things wait." You kneel beside them, hesitant, placing your hand near theirs. The ground beneath you feels different, heavier, but kind, like a blanket that remembers warmth. You don't feel worthy of it. Not after fire, not after forgetting. "I didn't know," you whisper. "I didn't understand what it meant." The stranger turns toward you, eyes deep and still. "Most don't," they say, "but the body does. Even in death, it remembers what it was made for." You try to speak again, but something rises in your throat, grief perhaps, or recognition. The weight of not being placed, the ache of never being returned. They rise slowly and offer a hand, not to lift you, but to mourn with you. You take it, and for a moment, in that stillness, something in you settles. Not fully, but enough to hope that the ground hasn't forgotten you completely. You sit with your knees pulled to your chest, arms wrapped around them, as if trying to hold yourself in one piece. The dust doesn't sting anymore. You've breathed it too long for that. It has settled in your lungs like an unwanted inheritance. Still, something resists. You think back further than you expect. Not to a moment, but to a truth. One that was whispered once, maybe in a quiet church pew, or read aloud in the trembling voice of someone who still believed the words were holy. "The body is not garbage." You close your eyes and say it again, slower this time, not out loud but inside where it matters. "The body is not garbage." You remember verses stitched into memory, phrases that once sat heavy on your tongue. "Do you not know that your body is a temple, fearfully and wonderfully made?" The words were always there, like thread pulling your form into shape. You didn't fully understand them, not then. They sounded poetic, a little dramatic. But now, in this place where ash coats the world and silence eats meaning, those words feel heavier than bone. They feel like defiance. You press your hands into the ground and feel its refusal to answer. The soil here has forgotten what it means to receive, not because it is unworthy, but because it was denied its sacred duty. It was made to cradle, to remember, to return, but something intervened. Fire, maybe, or indifference. You imagine a body on a table, yours perhaps, cold, still, and someone standing nearby with gloves and a clipboard. They aren't cruel, just efficient. They nod, confirm the identity, and then sign the form. A box is checked. Cremation. And like that, the temple is unmade. You bite the inside of your cheek, not to punish yourself, but to feel something human, something living. You run your hand along your arm, tracing veins beneath skin. You remember how wounds once healed here, how laughter once shook through this chest, how arms once held and were held. How could that be garbage? You think of the one who touched lepers and wept at graves, the one who fed the hungry with real hands and knelt to wash tired feet, the one whose body was broken but not discarded, buried, wrapped with care, mourned with oil and cloth and silence. Even he was returned to the earth. You lift your chin and look at the horizon, endless and pale. There are no crosses here, no markers, just flatness that forgets. But your body remembers, not in shape or movement, but in ache. A deep ache that says, I was made for more than this. You lie back slowly, eyes open to the still sky, and breathe. You feel your ribs rise and fall, feel your pulse thrum against your fingertips. You whisper into the hush, not to anyone in particular, but to whatever still listens. I was not meant to be burned. The words don't echo, but they don't disappear either. They settle into you, and in that settling, a quiet truth returns sown that fire couldn't erase, that ash couldn't choke. The body is not garbage. The body remembers God. The air shifts again. You don't know how long you've walked, or if you're walking at all. The world folds and unfolds around you like parchment left too long in the rain, fragile, stained, blurred at the edges. But then something breaks through the haze. Not color, not sound. Memory, but not yours. It washes over you like incense, thick and slow. You see men bent low over bodies. Their faces are familiar, though you've never met them. Sun-beaten skin, sand in their beards, eyes worn by grief and revelation. You see Paul, holding the lifeless hand of someone too young, too good. His lips move, but you can't hear the words. Only feel the weight of them, thick with sorrow, heavy with hope. Beside him, Peter kneels. Not the preacher now, not the rock, just a brother saying goodbye. He presses linen to a face gone still, and his fingers tremble. Not because he doubts, but because love never comes without ache. He doesn't rush. None of them do. They handle the body like it's still holy. Because it is. You see Thomas lift the shoulders, his arms straining, and for a flicker of a moment, you remember the hands that once traced scars in risen flesh. Now those same hands smooth the folds of burial cloth. None of them bring fire. Not one. There are no flames here, no pyres, no talk of ash or saving time or space or coin. Only earth, only weeping, only careful hands laying the dead into tombs carved by sweat and time and reverence. You see a woman watching nearby. Her hands are pressed over her mouth, as if to keep her heart from spilling out. Her tears are quiet, not desperate, just honest. These people believe in resurrection, but they bury their dead anyway. Not because they doubt, but because the body still matters. The vision shifts. Now the sun has dipped lower, casting long shadows across the faces of the apostles. The burial is done. The stone is rolled in place. There are no speeches, no spectacle, just a silence filled with something more eternal than grief. You blink, and the vision pulls away like mist burned off by morning. The dust returns, the ash, the windless plain, but the image lingers, and something aches. You think of today's dead, of urns passed across counters, names scribbled onto labels, ashes divided like heirlooms or swept like refuse. You think of how quickly we've learned to be done with bodies, how rarely we carry them anymore. The apostles carried theirs, in arms sore from work, through roads not paved for sorrow. With tears and songs and the ache of waiting, they did not fear the ground. They knew what God could do with graves. You kneel, not because anyone is watching, but because something in you longs to be part of that story, the one where the dead are not erased, but entrusted, where the body is not burned, but born, where love means you carry, even after the breath is gone, even when it hurts. The sky doesn't change, but something underneath you does. You kneel where the dust thickens, in a place that feels neither sacred nor cursed, just waiting. The silence here isn't empty. It leans forward, as though listening, as though this patch of ground remembers what the rest of the world forgot. You run your fingers through the ash, watching it break apart like old bread, dry, without weight, without promise. And suddenly a story surfaces not as a flash, but as a slow bloom. You didn't summon it. It simply arrives. A seed. You see it, small and silent, cradled in a calloused palm. A voice, old and kind, says it must go into the earth. Not tossed, not burned, buried. There is grief in that, in the letting go, in the darkness it will fall into. But there is also trust, a quiet knowing that the darkness is not the end, that it's the beginning. You watch the soil fold over the seed like a blanket. You watch rain soak the crusted surface until it breaks. You watch something green and trembling rise from that wound in the earth, slow, certain, stubborn. It doesn't burn. It doesn't vanish. It becomes a stalk, a leaf, a bloom, glory. You blink, and the parable fades. You're back in the ash again. The dust stains your skin, but doesn't hold you. You try to imagine a seed taking root here, in this weightless gray, but you can't. There's no depth, no soil, nothing to hold the mystery. Ash doesn't cradle. It only scatters. You stand slowly and breathe deep. The air tastes the same, dry and thin, carrying the memory of fire. You want to believe something could still grow here, but even the wind seems reluctant to stay. You think again of what you once heard, that the body is like a seed, sown in weakness, raised in power, sown in dishonor, raised in glory. You remember it as a passage, a promise read at funerals by trembling voices in dark suits. It sounded lovely then, abstract, comforting, but now it feels urgent, because a seed must be buried, not burned. Burial speaks of waiting, of becoming, of continuation. Cremation speaks of finality, of breaking, of dispersal. What is scattered does not rise. It drifts. It forgets where it came from. You whisper the question into the air, unsure if you want an answer. What grows from ash? No reply comes. Not in words, but in absence. You remember how Jesus spoke of seeds, how he refused to skip the burial, how even he entered a tomb before rising. You think of his body broken, yes, but placed with care, wrapped in cloth, laid in silence, watched by those who still hoped. Even God did not bypass the soil. You kneel again, this time not from confusion, but reverence. You press your fingers deeper into the dust, searching for anything that could hold. But there is no seed, only what fire left behind. You close your eyes and see it again, the green pushing up through dirt, not ash. Life emerging where death had only borrowed the ground. You breathe, slow and steady, and make a quiet vow. If you must be planted someday, let it be in earth. Let your body fall like a seed into promise, not vanish like smoke into forgetting, because ash rises and then disappears. But a seed remembers where it came from and returns. It's half buried in the dust. You don't notice it at first, just a slight irregularity in the smooth ash plain, a soft curve where there should be none. Your foot brushes against it and stops. You kneel, brushing the surface with your fingers, careful not to disturb too much. The ash lifts easily, as if it's been waiting. A fragment reveals it's thin, pale, hard. A bone, small, like a finger or part of a wrist. You hesitate before touching it fully. Something inside you still reverent even here. You press your thumb against it gently and feel a quiet thrum knot, a sound, not a pulse, but something else. It feels alive, not in the way flesh is, not warm or moving, but in the way stone remembers mountains, in the way old prayers cling to cathedral walls. This bone remembers something. You hold it in both hands. It is light, too light, and yet you feel its weight like a secret pressed into your palm. You sit down without meaning to, as if your body understands this is not a moment to rush. The air doesn't stir. The sky doesn't change, but the silence feels fuller now. You close your fingers around the bone and feel it hum. Not loud, not constant, just enough to let you know it's waiting. It has waited for years, decades, maybe centuries. It was not burned. It was not scattered. It was not denied rest. This fragment was placed, held, buried. And even now, it remembers the shape it once knew. You wonder whose it was. A martyr? A mother? A forgotten man who sang psalms with cracked lips and no audience but God? It doesn't matter. The bone carries no name, only faith. You lift it closer and feel something stir in your chest and ache, not of grief, but of recognition. This fragment does not doubt. This piece of someone once living still waits for what was promised. It was never meant to vanish, never meant to be fire's trophy. It still belongs to the story. You press it to your sternum, and for a moment, something inside you aligns. Because you've doubted. You've wondered if it mattered. The body, the burial, the way we return to earth. You've listened to the modern voices, say it's all the same, say the soul flies and the body fades. That fire is cleaner. That ground is old-fashioned. But this bone disagrees. It remembers what God said in the beginning, dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Not smoke, not ash, dust, soil, the kind that can grow things again. You feel that faith. Not your own, but the bones. And it humbles you, because even now, it believes. You sit there for a long time, the fragment cupped in your palms like a bird you're afraid to crush. You don't speak. You don't need to. The silence has turned holy again. The dust around you feels less empty, like something beneath it might still be watching. You gently place the bone back where you found it. Cover it with care, not because it's fragile, but because it's faithful. And you've learned to listen to what still waits in the ground. They gathered in the catacombs, not out of preference, but necessity. Not because the stone walls welcomed them, but because the surface world had turned against them. The streets above carried torches and soldiers. The arenas echoed with the screams of the faithful. The flame was not a friend in those days. It was a sentence, a method, a warning. And yet, they did not burn their dead. You see them in shadowed memory, wrapped in wool and fear, whispering hymns as they carried bodies by torchlight. Fathers carrying sons, daughters weeping into linen. They did not rush. They did not hide what they were doing, only where. Because even when the world threatened, the church remembered. They remembered the tomb outside Jerusalem. They remembered the angel who rolled the stone. They remembered the hands that touched wounds and broke bread after death had already failed. And so they buried. You see a mother kneel beside a shallow grave, lips pressed to the forehead of a boy too young to speak. She doesn't ask for vengeance. She asks for resurrection. Her hands tremble, but her faith does not. She places the boy in the earth and marks the place with a stone, not because it's safe, but because it's right. There were fires waiting for her if she were caught, but she feared them less than forgetting. You see elders dragging wrapped bodies through tunnels narrow and slick with moisture. Their backs ache, their lungs rasp, but they press forward, Not because they are brave, but because they are resolved. The body matters. It always did. Even when Rome said otherwise. They had watched believers thrown into flame. They had heard the lies, that ash was cleaner, faster, more efficient. But they had seen what flame does. It erases. It consumes. And resurrection is not about memory. It is about matter. So they carved tombs from stone, with hands blistered from prayer and shovels. They sang quietly over each body, not with despair, but with defiance. Burial was not just tradition. It was resistance. They feared the fire not because it killed, but because it unmade. Because it left nothing for the earth to hold. Because it defied the promise that the dead would rise. Not as ideas, not as ghosts, but as flesh made new. You walk now, through their buried legacy, through a corridor of bones, stacked like libraries of belief. You feel the pressure of their prayers in the walls. You run your hand along names etched by candlelight into stone, and you know this was not done by accident. This was chosen, fought for, protected, because they believed that the body, broken though it was, still bore the image, still waited for the trumpet, still mattered to God. And the flame could not have it. You stand at the entrance of a sealed chamber and feel the quiet roar of history humming behind it. These weren't saints carved from myth. They were mourners, workers, shepherds and bakers and mothers and martyrs, ordinary people who chose earth over fire, not for ease but for hope, not because it was safe, but because it was true. Ash was never a place to belong. You try to shake the thought, but it lingers, thick as the dust in your throat. It scratches when you breathe, clings to your skin, settles in your hair, like guilt that won't wash off. You remember stories, ancient ones, older than language, older than this silence. In them, ash was never holy. It was always what was left after something was lost. You see a man tearing his garments, face smeared with soot, eyes wild with grief. He isn't mourning a funeral, he's mourning a failure. Sin clings to his back like a shadow. The ash isn't comfort, it's a sentence. A cry for mercy from the ground up. You remember Nineveh, a king descending from his throne to sit in the dirt, sackcloth against skin, ash upon his brow, not because he had buried someone he loved, but because he feared the wrath that hovered just outside the city gates. He covered himself in what was dead because he was desperate for something to live. Ash, in those days, meant something had gone terribly wrong. You remember Job scraping his sores in a heap of ashes, trying to understand why everything was stripped from him. His friends sat with him in silence, not to console but to question. The ash didn't heal. It only mirrored the ruin inside. You look around now, and everything is ash. No one wears it in repentance here. It's not a sign of sorrow. It's what remains when the world has stopped asking for forgiveness. The prophets, too, walked through cities covered in dust and cried out warnings. They smeared ash across their heads, not as a badge of faith, but as a last resort. When words failed, when the people would not listen, they hoped God would see the ash and delay the fire. But never once did they say to live in it. Never once did they say to die into it. Ash was for altars, not graves. For judgment, not belonging. You crouch and scoop some into your hand. It slips through your fingers like time. There is no weight to it, no memory. It does not speak. It does not hold. It simply drifts. You wonder what it once was. A tree, a robe, a body. It makes no difference now. The flame has erased the story. You press your palm against your chest, searching for the rhythm beneath bone. It still beats, still believes, and it knows, in some old part of you, that ash was never the end. It was always what came before the cry, the lament, the turning back. You think of how people today scatter it, how they place it in lockets, in urns, in seas, as if this was the gentle option. But ash was never gentle. It was what remained when the sacred had been consumed. You stand slowly, brushing your hands clean, though nothing comes off. The stain is deeper than skin. You don't belong in this gray. You were never meant to end in this color. You walk forward, each step softer than the last, and whisper not a prayer, but a remembering. Ash was for sorrow. Ash was for judgment. But the body was for glory. You dig because it feels like something sacred. Your hands are raw. The ground is dry, too dry to take shape. Every scoop you pull together collapses the moment you turn away. Still, you dig. Because if you don't, you'll forget what it means to try, to honor, to hold on to anything in a world where everything scatters. The wind isn't cruel, just constant. It pulls at your sleeves, your hair, the loosened dust you've worked so hard to shape into rest. You tell yourself to keep going, that graves don't need to be deep to be real. But the ash won't agree. It slips through your fingers, defies your weight, swallows your effort. You weep, not loudly, not all at once, just the slow kind grief that leaks instead of crashes, the kind that rises without asking and refuses to leave. You press your forehead to the place you've dug, half hoping your breath will still the air around it. It doesn't. The wind laughs and lifts the edge of what little you've built, carrying it away like it was never there. You try again. You gather stones, place them one by one in a line. A crude border, a hopeful wall. Maybe if you mark the edges, the dust will learn to stay. Maybe memory needs a frame to last. You press the last stone into place and lean back, letting the weight of your body sit heavy beside it. But the wind shifts again, soft at first, then sharp. One stone tips, another rolls, and then it's all gone again, swept clean, like a name never written. You sit in the silence it leaves behind, your hands coated in a film of what once was effort, now failure. You whisper something into the empty space, not a prayer exactly, just a plea, a question with no form. Why won't it stay? The world does not answer, not with words, only with movement. The sky remains still, but the ground never listens. Not here, not anymore. You look down at your hands. They shake not from weakness, but from wanting something to hold, something that won't leave. You think of those who once carried their dead, who buried with linen and tears and hymns, who marked the place, who believed that even in death there should be shape. But here, there is no place, only the illusion of it. You lie down where your grave should have been. The dust does not embrace you. It shifts beneath your weight, refusing to carry. You feel smaller than you ever have, not because you've lost something, but because you cannot even lose it properly. You reach for one of the stones again, press it against your chest, just to feel its weight, just to believe that something can still rest. But even it feels lighter now, like it's learning to let go of you too. You close your eyes and try to picture a grave that holds, one with depth, with soil, with roots that remember, but it drifts like a dream, too soft to stay. Everything here disappears, even grief, especially love. The wind falls still, as if the world is holding its breath. You stop walking. The dust settles at your feet, and in the pause, something shifts not around you, but inside. A weight you didn't know you carried begins to lift, not all at once, but slowly, like dawn blooming behind a thick curtain. You blink, and the gray begins to thin, not vanish, just soften. And then the vision comes. At first, it's just soil, rich, dark, undisturbed, nothing like the ash you've known. This earth has weight and warmth. It's not scorched or scattered. It holds itself together, as though remembering its purpose, as though it's waiting, the kind of waiting that has hope inside it. Then the grave. It doesn't open like a wound. It opens like a door, not ripped or shattered parted, as if the earth too is reverent. You see the ground stretch wide, not in violence but in welcome. It's not the swallowing sort of grave, it's the kind that gives back. And the body, you see it not as dust or ash or shadow, but as form, whole, not untouched by death, but transformed by something beyond it. There is no fire, no smoke, just light. Not blinding, not boastful, just sure. A soft radiance that spills from the folds of linen, from the face turned skyward, from the hands once still, now stirring. The body rises, not like it's fighting gravity, but like gravity has let go, as if the earth itself agrees. This one should not stay buried. You expect to feel fear, but you don't. You feel remembered. You feel called, as if something in you recognizes this moment, like it's been echoing since the first time someone whispered that the body matters, that the grave is not the end, that what is sown in weakness is raised in power. You watch the figure ascend, not to vanish, but to be known, fully, finally. There's no rush in the vision, no trumpet, no thunder, just the slow, deliberate motion of rising. You look at the soil again. It's not torn or hollow. It's alive, ready to hold again, to open again. It is not the enemy here. It is the witness. And you begin to understand. The grave was never just about endings. It was about making space, about giving the body back to the promise it was made for. You step forward in the vision, your own feet brushing against the rich earth, and feel the ground accept your weight. It doesn't shift or resist. It bears you, like a memory too deep to erase. The light fades, but not completely. It lingers in the corners of your vision, in the warmth that now settles across your back. You look down at your hands. They are still dirty with dust, still empty, but no longer ashamed, because you have seen what the soil can do. It doesn't destroy. It holds. And then, when the time is right, it opens. You sit alone beneath a sky that doesn't move. The air tastes of absence of names lost, of places that once mattered but now drift without shape. Around you, dust swirls in slow, exhausted circles, never quite landing, never quite letting go. You cup your hands and catch a handful of it, watching how easily it slips between your fingers. There's no weight to it, no story left, just a whisper of what once was. And still, you wonder, what if he remembers this? What if even dust isn't beyond his reach? You think of bone, how it hums with faith, how it waits like a closed book left on a sacred shelf. But this ash, this smoke, how can it wait when it doesn't stay? It rises, scatters, disappears into wind and cloud and rain. There is no place for it. No grave, no name etched in stone, but God-shaped man from dust. Not marble, not fire, not light, dust. And not by accident. He knelt in the dirt, breathed into it, called it very good. Maybe he still kneels. Maybe he still breathes. You press your palm to the ground and feel nothing but grit. It doesn't speak. But you remember how the earth once opened to cradle the dead, how it held them like a secret, waiting for the sound of his voice. You wonder if smoke can hear that voice too, if ashes know how to wait, if fire that erased still leaves behind a trace loud enough for heaven. The prophets wore ash when they wept, not because it healed, but because it begged. Maybe that's what this dust is now, a prayer that never learned the words, a plea in pieces, scattered too far to gather, but not too far to be known. You whisper aloud, not sure who you're talking to. Do you remember this too? The question hangs in the stillness. You picture a handful of smoke rising into the sky, disappearing into clouds, mixing with the breath of the world. You see it carried across oceans, slipping through cracks in stone walls, curling into lungs that never asked for it. You wonder how anything so formless could be claimed. but he counts every hair, every tear, every sparrow. Could he not also count every particle of what once bore his image? You close your eyes and try to believe that nothing is lost. Not really. That what was scattered can still be summoned. That what fire tried to silence can still be sung back. That the God who carved galaxies can still hold dust in his hand and call it beloved. Maybe he never needed markers. Maybe he remembers shape without seeing it. Maybe the soul is not alone. You open your eyes and look again at the wind. It still moves. But now, you wonder if it carries not just ashes, but names. Not just loss, but memory. And maybe even hope. At first, there is only stillness. The kind that settles after a long forgetting, when silence has grown roots and no one dares speak. You walk into the valley without meaning to, drawn by something older than memory. The air here is heavy with waiting. The hills do not echo. They absorb. You kneel, and the dust beneath your feet shifts, not because of your weight, but because something beneath it stirs. Then, a sound. Not thunder, not wind. A creak, low and deep, like a door long sealed now groaning open. You freeze, and in the stillness, you hear it again dry upon dry, brittle touching brittle. It comes from below, not from the trees, not from the sky, from the ground itself. You look down and see bone. Not one, not two, thousands. Bleached by time, scattered by chaos, half buried in earth too dry for tears. Skulls facing nowhere, ribs curled inward like hands in prayer. Limbs splayed like punctuation in a sentence too broken to read. These were people. They had names once. Breath, laughter, and then something took it all. Time, war, fire. You don't know. But they were not buried. They were left. You don't speak, but something speaks through you. Not with words of your own, but with echo. Can these bones live? The question crashes inside your chest. Not a challenge, not a test. Just a weight, placed gently in your hands. You look at the valley again and want to say no. Want to say they've been here too long, lost too much, scattered too wide. But the bones begin to move, one at a time, then all at once. They tremble, they clatter, they roll toward one another with purpose, not chaos, not chance. They find their pairs, their joints, their place. Knees to thighs, ribs to spines, skulls to necks. You watch the valley stitch itself back together, not with flesh, not yet, but with order, with belonging. Then the sound deepens. Tendons stretch over white. Muscle binds what was broken. Skin remembers its form. Eyes open, not in confusion but clarity. They do not ask where they are. They already know. They've been waiting for this moment since the scattering, but they do not yet rise. Not until the wind comes. It doesn't arrive with fury. It breathes, slowly, from the four corners of everything. A wind not born of storm, but of promise. It slides over the valley like a whisper carried from heaven. And they inhale. One by one, the bodies draw in air, not just into lungs, but into being, into self, into soul. They risen not like soldiers, but like saints, each one whole, each one called, each one no longer forgotten. You watch the valley fill with life that had no right to return, but it has, because the voice remembered, the bones remembered, and the breath obeyed. You take a step forward, and the ground no longer recoils. It receives you. The wind curls around your shoulders like a mantle, and for the first time since you arrived in this barren world, something deep inside you does not ache. You whisper the question again, though now you already know the answer. Yes, even the scattered can stand. You don't know where the sound comes from at first. It doesn't pierce the sky, it parts it, as if the air itself remembers something you don't and must make room. You freeze, heart halting mid-beat, unsure if what you've heard is outside you or within. It's not like the horn of battle or the groan of storm. It doesn't warn, it summons. A trumpet, but not like any you've heard before. This one isn't forged in brass or breath. It feels older, born of something deeper than sound, like the world itself is playing it, like it was waiting for this moment to exhale. The tone doesn't rise or fall. It holds, unwavering, strong enough to still the wind. Even the dust quiets. It's not music. It's memory. Your knees bend without command, not from fear, but from weight. The air is heavy now, not with sorrow, but with meaning. You press your hands to the earth and feel it vibrate, not with destruction, but with anticipation. Like the soil knows the trumpet too, like it's been listening longer than you have. And then you understand. This is not a sound for ash. This is a call for the living, or rather for those who were. You lift your head slowly, eyes sweeping across the endless horizon of gray. Nothing moves, yet everything waits. A stillness, unlike any before, settles over the world. Not empty, full, like the pause before rain, like breath drawn deep before a name is spoken. The sound grows no louder, but it deepens. You feel it in your spine, in your ribs, in the hollow behind your eyes. It pulls at you not backward, not upward, but inward, towards something you forgot you carried, towards something flesh once held with reverence. You thought decay had taken it, but no, the trumpet says otherwise. It speaks to bone, to dust, to atoms scattered to the wind, and they listen, not with ears, but with origin. Even ash, it seems, remembers being whole. Your heart begins to beat faster, not from fear, from hope, the impossible kind, the kind you never dared name, because naming it would hurt too much if it never came. But it's coming now, not fire, not wrath, a voice wrapped in brass and light. You remember words spoken long ago, words you never fully understood. In the twinkling of an eye, the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable. You never thought it would sound like this. So still, so sure, so final. You rise slowly, your limbs uncertain, but your soul newly sure. There is something in the distance, a ripple in the fabric of this lifeless plane. You can't see it clearly, but you feel its pull. You walk toward it, because that is what the sound asks, not demands, invites. It is not calling you out of fear. It is calling you home. And as you move, you notice something strange. The ground no longer crumbles beneath your feet. It holds, as if it too is remembering how to welcome the living. It begins without noise. No gust, no crack, no sudden blaze. Just a flicker so small it might be imagined, where the air seems to fold slightly, like something behind it is stirring. You stand in a field of gray, the ground powdered with what once had weight and name. For so long nothing moved here, but now the stillness trembles. Ashes rise, not whipped by weather or pulled by current. They rise as if summoned, as if they remember. A single fleck lifts first, delicate, unsure. It floats upward, not spinning, not drifting, but aligning. Another follows, then another. You watch the shapes gather not in chaos, but in choreography. They move like they know where to go, like they've been called back from somewhere far off, not by force, but by promise. Your breath catches, not in fear, in reverence. You step forward, slow, eyes wide. These ashes had no reason to stir. They were the end of the end, the result of forgetting, of choosing fire instead of soil. But now, they obey a different voice. One you cannot hear but feel, like pressure behind your ribs, like memory beneath your skin. You think of the jar you once held, the one with your name, too light to carry your story, yet too heavy to ignore. You wonder if it broke, if its contents leaked into this field, and if part of what rises now once belonged to you. The thought should scare you. It doesn't. Because it means you are not beyond gathering, not beyond remembering. The ashes continue to climb. Some flicker with embers that do not burn. Others shimmer like light caught in dust. You don't know what's holding them together, what draws them into form, but it is steady, and it is true. The air hums with something ancient, something patient. You look around and realize you are not the only one watching. Others have gathered, some still translucent, some nearly whole. They stand with hands clasped or eyes closed, breathing slowly, as if preparing to receive something long denied. No one speaks. No one needs to. The movement is enough. The gathering is the testimony. This is not magic. It is not science. It is not poetry. It is promise. You remember the garden, the breath into dust, the return to earth. You remember that nothing God ever named was forgotten, that even when broken, things waited. And this rising is not a reversal of death. It is the fulfillment of life. You whisper the only words that seem to fit. You remembered. The ashes rise higher. They begin to take shape, not faces, not limbs, not yet, just outlines, like a sketch waiting for breath. But it is enough. Enough to believe this is not the end. Enough to know the fire did not finish the story. Something holy is rewriting it. And the wind? It never came. Because this resurrection doesn't need weather. It only needs a word kept, a vow held, a love that does not forget what even we have abandoned. You stand still, the rising forming around you, and for the first time since arriving in this ash-covered land, you do not ache, you do not fear. You belong. You remember the silence of that tomb, the way it held its breath before the world exhaled in wonder. It was never meant to hold forever, only for 3 days. Just long enough to let the world believe death had won. Just long enough for sorrow to settle in the bones of his friends. Just long enough for everyone to forget that he'd said he wouldn't stay. And then the stone moved. Not pushed, not pried. It rolled. On its own or by unseen hands, no one really knows. But it moved. And that one motion unraveled everything the grave had tried to claim. He walked out. Not limping, not staggering, not like one barely pulled back from the edge. He walked as one who had been through the fire and come out without smoke. The linen still folded, the guard still stunned, the air around him charged with something older than time. Death hadn't released him. It had bowed. You remember the stories, how he showed his hands, the holes still there, not bleeding, just open, like proof that pain was real, but powerless. His side bore the mark too, as if to say, yes, I was broken, but look, I am not gone. He ate with them, not as a ghost, as a man. He didn't hide the scars. He didn't need to. They were no longer wounds. They were witness. The body that left the tomb was the same, yet glorified. Flesh, not fantasy. Substance, not smoke. And it was him. Still him. Not replaced. Not remade. Raised. You feel the truth of it like warmth spreading through the cold parts of your memory. He could have ascended from the tomb in silence, in secret, but he chose to walk out, in light, in mourning, in the middle of everything. You picture it again, the stone, rolled away not to let him out, but to let the world see in. And now, here in this gray place, surrounded by what was burned and broken, that moment returns to you like breath you didn't know you'd been holding. He was not buried in flame. He was wrapped in cloth, laid in earth, and he rose, not as smoke, but as flesh, alive enough to be touched, real enough to speak, divine enough to rise, yet human enough to eat breakfast on a beach with friends who had failed him. The resurrection wasn't about escape, it was about return. He came back. Because the body was never disposable. Because God never changed his mind about calling it good. And if he walked out of a grave with scars still glowing but soul at peace, then maybe everything you've feared here, this ash, this scattering, this absence of gravesis, not the end of the story. Maybe it's just the pause, the silence before the stone moves. And now you remember his name, not just as a word, as a promise. Jesus, the firstborn from the dead, the one who carried death and came back with life. The pattern, the proof. He walked out, so others could too. You stand in the middle of what should have been a wasteland. The ash still clings to the edges of things, faint and fine as forgotten grief. But something has shifted. The ground no longer rejects you. The silence has softened. And now you feel it. Not wind, not warmth, breath. It does not howl, it does not tear, it does not demand. It wraps, not like a flame seeking something to consume, but like a whisper that remembers your name. You close your eyes, and it moves through you, not around, not past, but through, as if it was always meant to dwell there. The first time, long ago, that breath shaped dust into life. You remember that, and now here it is again. Not from lungs, not from sky, but from within the deep heart of God. A spirit, not the kind that terrifies or judges, not the kind that scorches the guilty to the ground. This fire doesn't burn skin, it doesn't blacken hope, it renews, rebuilds, rests. You feel it in your hands, where fear used to be. You feel it in your chest, where absence used to echo. It hovers like it did at the beginning, brooding over chaos, waiting for the word to shape order. But this time, it is not shaping stars. It is stitching souls, calling broken bodies back into the story. Not by force, by love. You open your hands. You feel no heat, but your palms glow faintly, not with pain, but with purpose. Like the Spirit has written something into your skin, not in ink, but in light. A seal, perhaps. A reminder. You are not forgotten. You are not thrown away. You are still the temple. The fire of the world took bodies and left cinders, but this fire restores. You think of Pentecostans of flame, not to destroy, but to declare. Power not to crush, but to comfort. That same fire is here now, only it does not rest on your head. It rests inside your bones, where despair once settled, where the question of worth had nested in shadows. Now, something holy sings there. You breathe, and the breath breathes back. Not air, presence. It is not loud, it is not showy, but it is undeniable. It wraps around every fragment of you, every splinter, and hums, not in anger, but in patience. You are still being made new, not despite the ash. Because of it, you open your eyes, and the horizon no longer looks empty. The ground shimmers with the suggestion of green, not grass, not yet, but possibility. The sky, though still gray, carries the promise of shift. It is the pause before dawn, when the dark no longer owns the world but has not yet let it go. You are not afraid, not anymore, because now you know the difference between fire that takes and fire that gives. This spirit, it is not destruction. It is breath that burns nothing, and everything it touches lives. You thought you had disappeared, not just died, but dissolved, scattered into particles too small to matter. The fire had taken everything, flesh, name, place, and left behind only a wisp that barely resembled memory. Even the ground refused you. Even the wind forgot your shape. You stood in the dust for what felt like lifetimes, weightless and waiting for nothing. But then something began to change. It didn't come as a sudden light or a thunderous voice. It was more like being remembered, slowly, gently, as if someone was retracing the lines of your face from a picture only they had kept. You didn't feel yourself return all at once. It came in fragments, a warmth in your chest, a stillness in your hands, a sense that you were not empty after all. You looked down and saw them, your fingers. Not charred, not burning, whole. You flexed them, and they obeyed. The breath in your lungs was shallow, but it was yours. You are not gone. The words came not from outside, but from within, like a truth too deep to be spoken aloud. You turned slowly, half expecting the smoke to rise again, to erase you before you could fully form. But it didn't. It lingered, yes, but thinner now, translucent, like it no longer had permission to hide you. You are not lost. You heard it again, steady and sure. And then a memory returned, not of the fire, but of the one who walked into it long before you ever arrived, who stood in furnaces with the faithful, who called dead bones back into song, who stitched torn hearts with the thread of his own breath. You remembered him, not as a figure in the sky, but as a hand that reached through your ruin, a voice that had spoken over graves, a shepherd who had never once misplaced a sheep, no matter how broken, no matter how burned. And suddenly, the smoke felt less like an end and more like a veil, a thin film between what you saw and what he always had. You had thought yourself abandoned, but he had never let go, not of your name, not of your shape, not of your soul. Every fleck of you had been counted, every ash traced, every silence known. You looked up, and the sky no longer felt like a ceiling. It opened. And in that opening was not judgment, but welcome. You felt it rise inside you, this strange courage, this unfamiliar joy. You were not being remade into something new. You were being restored to who you had always been, not erased, remembered. You walked forward, not sure where the path began, but certain now that one existed. The smoke curled at your feet, not binding you, not clinging but bowing. It had no claim on you anymore. And in the distance, though still far, you saw the mothers, also rising, also whole, and among them, the one with the scars, the only fire that healed. You are not lost in the smoke. You never were. At first, they looked like shadows, shapes moving just beyond the edge of clarity, neither dust nor smoke, but something solid forming slowly from the ruins. They didn't hurry. They weren't summoned with urgency or alarm. They simply rose, as if they had always intended to, as if this was the moment the soil had been waiting for. You watched from the ridge, unsure whether to move, unsure whether you were one of them. But something in your bones pulsed. Not pain, not fear, recognition, like a tree remembering spring. The figures straightened. Their forms took weight, flesh returning, posture lifting. Not perfect, not polished, but unmistakably alive. They looked like trees, rooted, upright, patient. Their limbs no longer curled in agony, their faces no longer smeared with ash. What once crumbled beneath flame now stood like oaks, firm, gentle, held together not by effort, but by grace. You could almost hear it humming in the air, the word that brought them back. Restore. One stepped forward, not young, not old, just eternal. His face bore deep lines, not from sorrow, but from something wiser. He nodded toward you, as though inviting you into something already yours. You stepped down the ridge, and with each step, your body remembered itself. Your weight returned. Your lungs deepened. Your spine lifted. Not because you earned it, but because something holy refused to let you stay scattered. When you reached the others, no one spoke. There was no need. Everything that needed to be said was already singing through the soil. You placed your hand against the earth and felt its pulse. not decay. Life, steady and rising. The trees, real ones, began to form in the distance. Saplings, still small, but bold, as if creation was echoing your return. Bark growing thick, where flame once devoured. Roots threading deep, where fire once danced. You looked around and saw faces you'd forgotten. Not imagined, not dreamed, remembered. Their eyes met yours without question, without judgment, only welcome. You were one of them, not a spectator, not a remnant, one of the restored. You touched your own skin. It was warm. You pressed your foot into the ground. It held you, not like before, when dust gave way. Now the soil received you like a mother receiving a child returned. You thought of Eden, of gardens, of the promise that flesh, when sown in faith, would rise not as ash, but as glory. You looked at your hands again, scarred, maybe, but not broken, not lost. You could feel your name again, not spoken aloud, but stitched inside you. He had remembered every syllable. And here, in this place where death had claimed victory, you stood among those who refused to vanish. Trees planted by water, raised from ruin, blooming in the land that once burned. You felt no need to run, no urge to hide, only the quiet certainty of presence, of peace. You were not waiting anymore. You had become the thing you thought you'd lost. You were no longer dust in the wind. You were a tree again. You lower yourself slowly, unsure at first if the ground will keep its promise. For so long it rejected you, crumbling, shifting, refusing to remember the shape of your body. You had tried to lie down before, to surrender, to let go, but the earth would not hold you then. It slipped away like regret. Now, as your hands press into the soil, it does not recoil, it receives. The dust is warm, not scorched, not dry. It carries the scent of something living, something growing. You feel its texture beneath your fingers, soft but not weak, steady, not cold, as though the soil had been waiting for you to return, not as ash, not as fragments, but as someone whole enough to be kept. You lie back and breathe in, not as a gasp, not as a goodbye, just breath, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to fear. Above you, the sky is still wide, but it no longer looms. The gray has lifted into a pale gold, and though no sun burns overhead, there is light, a light that doesn't glare, but wraps, a light that understands stillness. You stretch out your arms not in surrender, but in rest. And for the first time since the burning, you feel peace settle into your limbs like water into dry ground. No tension, no fight, just belonging. The earth beneath your spine curves to meet you. No grave carved, no coffin nailed, just a cradle of creation, shaping itself around your return. You feel it rise behind your shoulders, around your ribs, beneath your knees, like hands, like a lullaby hummed in the dirt. You do not fall asleep. Not yet, but you rest. Not because you've been forgotten, because you've been remembered. You had wondered if you would ever feel whole again, if dust could gather into something worth saving, if bones lost in flame could find their way home. But now you know, you are not scattered. You are sown. Every fiber of your being hums with the quiet truth that death is not an ending. It is a planting. And this ground, this place that once shunned you has become your soil, not as punishment, as promise. You close your eyes, not in sorrow, in faith. You are not waiting for destruction. You are waiting for dawn, the kind that splits stone, the kind that calls names louder than trumpets, the kind that makes graves breathe. You do not know when it will come, but you know it will. And until it does, the ground holds you, not as ash, as seed. It begins not with thunder, but with breath, Not the sharp inhale of waking from a nightmare, but the gentle drawing in of air that was always waiting for you. You do not burst from the soil. You rise through it, slowly, as if the earth itself is yielding you back intact, remembered, beloved. There is no flame here, no smoke, no furnace swallowing bone, only light. Not bright enough to blind, but warm enough to guide. It meets your skin like a memory fulfilled, like a word kept long after the world forgot how to listen. You stand. You do not stagger. Your limbs do not ache. Your spine holds steady. Your lungs stretch wide, deeper than they ever did when you were first born. There is something in your chest now that hums, not with fear, not with grief, but with promise made real. You look at your hands. They do not carry the stench of fire. They are not blackened or missing. They are whole. You curl them into fists and release again. The movement feels like prayer, like music made flesh. All around you, others rise too. Some from tombs, some from dust, some from places no one marked or mourned. But all of them rise the same held, not by stone, not by ritual, not by memory of men, but by something deeper, something eternal. You see a woman clothed in light, tears drying on cheeks that once wept alone. A child lifts his arms and laughs, as if this rising was never strange. A man with scars down both hands walks forward, not as one wounded, but as one who is already healed. You walk among them, and no one asks how you died. No one inquires whether you burned or broke or faded. The question is gone now. The answer was never in the ashes. It was in the remembering. He remembered you, even when you could not remember yourself, even when your name was nothing more than a whisper lost in the wind. He held every fragment. Not one fleck of you was discarded, not one sigh forgotten. You were never gathered by fire. You were gathered by faith. It wrapped around your bones when there were no bones left. It traced the outline of your soul before even the smoke had cleared. It did not demand proof or form, only trust. And now, here you are, standing, not as ash, as image, not a ghost, a son, a daughter, a child restored. You walk forward, and the ground does not tremble. It welcomes. Flowers bloom beneath your feet, uncrushed. The sky sings, but it is not loud. It hums like a heart, finally whole. You lift your eyes and see him, the one who wept at graves, the one who broke bread with the broken, the one who left his own tomb behind like a folded cloth. He does not rush toward you. He waits, smiling, because he knew you'd come. You do not kneel. You do not fall. You run, and he catches you, not because you were strong, because you were his. And in the end, it wasn't fire that raised you. It was faith. His, not yours.